a serial killer, a cancerous tumor, and a number. Aquinas says they're all good. How's that possible? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Channel summary of the Summa Theologiae. Today we're in Prima Pars, question 5, article 3. The question is everything good? Now, articles 1 and 2, which we've already gone over, have shown Aquinas building up to a certain view of goodness, and it's the transcendental view. The transcendentals are features of being. They belong to everything that exists. They include being, true, good, and one. They run across all the categories of being. Everything that exists is existing as transcendental. So, for example, everything that exists is one in some sense. One, it's a unity, in other words. Everything that exists is true insofar as it is intelligible. Maybe not intelligible to our minds, but to an infinite, unlimited mind, then they would be intelligible to that. Now, Aquinas is going to argue that everything that exists is in some sense good, and that in some sense is going to be doing a lot of work. Let's also refresh our memories on Article 1 that said that goodness is desirability. To say something is good is to say that it is desirable, that things tend toward it, that it has the character of an end. Now, that's not a claim about moral goodness specifically. It's a claim about the metaphysical structure of goodness. So we could say that fire is good for the match insofar as it tends towards combustion. We could say that food is good for the animal insofar as it tends towards nourishment. So goodness at this level just means that which a thing is oriented towards, or that which perfects it. By perfects it, remember, we mean completes it. Also remember that Aquinas is working with Aristotle's act-potency distinction. A thing's actuality is what it actually is right now. Its potentiality is what it isn't but could be. So a block of marble is potentially a statue. An acorn is potentially an oak tree. And actuality is always a kind of perfection because it's the realization of what a thing can be. And as we saw in Article 1, perfection implies desirability, which implies goodness. Okay, so is everything good? Aquinas says yes. He says that every being that is not God is God's creature. And we see in 1 Timothy 4:4 that every creature that God has created is good. Now, God, which is the only other thing besides those creatures that he created, is the ultimate good. Therefore, everything is good. Here's his argument for saying so. Every act implies some sort of perfection. Again, in Aquinas' framework, act means actuality, the realization of some capacity. When a seed becomes an oak, the oak is the act of what that seed could have potentially been. Actuality is always the fulfillment, the perfection, not moral perfection, but ontological perfection. The thing has become more fully what it is. Okay, 2, perfection implies desirability and goodness, and this he gets from Article 1. 3, all being, as being, has actuality and is in some way perfect. This is the metaphysical claim. Anything that exists has at least some actuality. Even the most minimal existent, we'll see later on here, we'll talk about prime matter. Even that has some degree of being, and therefore some degree of actuality, and therefore some degree of perfection. To exist at all is to be actual in some respect. Then his conclusion, therefore every being as such is good. Again, that qualifier, as such, does a lot of work here. Aquinas is not saying that every existing thing is morally good, or that every existing thing is good in every respect. He's saying that insofar as a thing has being, in that regard, it is good. Okay, let's look at some objections to this view. In objection 1, he says, goodness is superadded to being, but whatever is added to being limits it, such as substance, quantity, quality, and those kinds of things. So goodness limits being, so not every being is good. This is a clever objection. The thought goes like this. When you add a category to being, and here we're talking about the Aristotelian categories of substance, quantity, quality, relation, those kinds of things. When you add that to being, you cut off the things that that category is not. So if you say substance, then you're cutting off the things that are not substance. When you say quantity, right, and that we're talking about something like 210 pounds or 6'2". If you talk about those kinds of things, you're cutting off the things that are not quantity. And the objection is saying goodness is like that. It's cutting off the stuff that is not good. So there's got to be stuff on the outside that is not good. Here's his reply. Substance, quantity, quality, and everything that's included in them limit being by applying it to some nature or essence. And in this sense, Goodness does not add anything to being beyond the aspect of desirability and perfection, which is also proper to being whatever kind of being it is. So goodness does not limit being. In other words, when you say this being here is a substance or this being is a quantity, you're specifying what kind of a being it is. And that specification narrows down the field. But goodness doesn't work like that. Again, it's a transcendental. Goodness doesn't add any new content onto being. It only adds the aspect of desirability and perfection. And that's a feature that accompanies being as such, regardless of what kind of being we're talking about. So it doesn't narrow being down to some proper subset. It highlights something that's true of being in general. Objection 2, the objection from evil. No evil is good. Here he quotes Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. But some things are called evil, right? So there must be some things that are not good. And of course, this is the most intuitive of the objections. It's the first one that you would think when somebody says everything is good. His reply, no being can be spoken of as evil, formally as being, but only so far as it lacks being. And he gives an example of a man who lacks a virtue, or an eye that lacks the power of sight, as evil things. So this is very important. This is a doctrine of evil as privation. Evil is not a substance that is opposed to goodness, two substances that duke it out to see which one is going to win. Instead, evil is a privation. It's an absence of a good. So if you could consider like a human being like a beaker that if you are, there's some way that you should be, and that's where the beaker is totally filled up. And if you don't fill your beaker all the way up, if you aren't quite the way you should be, whatever that lack there is, that's what's considered evil. Evil is just a lack of goodness. It's a way you should be, but you're not that way. And the example of the eye is a good one because it brings up an analogy. We call humans blind that can't see, but we don't call rocks blind that can't see. Of course, all rocks can't see, but they're not supposed to see. There's a way that humans should be. And if they're not that way, then we consider that evil. Now, of course, we're not saying that the person is evil that can't see, right? That's not what we mean. But it is evil that happens, right? It's evil that that person is not the way that he should be or she should be. We call a person evil, however, when that person is lacking a virtue that person should have, right? That person should be a particular way in character and is not. That is morally evil. The next objection is from prime matter. Goodness implies desirability. Prime matter, however, does not imply desirability, but rather that which desires. And the word desirability here is not necessarily meaning something that, I have a passion for, I want, right? It's more like something is directed towards that thing. And prime matter is not something that things are directed towards, it's directed towards other things. What the heck is prime matter? Well, it's important that we know this all has to do with the hylomorphic view of Aristotle. On Aristotle's view, we have everything that's material made of matter and form, two principles. And the formal principle is whatever it is in a thing that makes it be the kind of a thing it is or makes it be the way that it is. The matter is that which is made to be that particular way. So the form is a metaphysical principle. Now, let's say you couldn't do this, but let's say you stripped all the form from an object. You would be left with just pure potentiality, right? Matter is the potential aspect. It can be a particular way, and form is the actualizer. It makes it to be the way that it is, or the kind of a thing that it is. And if you were to take away the form, then you would have nothing but pure potential. Of course, that's not possible. Right? Pure potential would just be nothing. You have to actually be something in order to have a potential. But let's say we stripped it down. Then we would be left with this pure potentiality. That is what we could call prime matter. And if it's pure potentiality, it doesn't have any goodness of its own. It is not a desirable thing. It desires other. It wants to be informed, right? It tends towards being informed rather than being the form of other things. So is prime matter a counterexample here? Aquinas says no. As primary matter has only potential being, so it is only potentially good. And that's why to be desirable is not its property, but to desire. Prime matter has no actuality of its own, but it's not exactly nothing either. It participates in goodness to a certain extent. namely by its relation to or its aptitude for the goodness. It is ordered toward form, right? It is ordered to receive form. It's oriented towards actuality. And that kind of orientation is a minimal participation in goodness. Now, he goes further to talk about the Platonists, people that followed Plato. They say prime matter is non-being on account of the privation attaching to it. But again, he says it participates in some way in goodness, and again, by its relation or aptitude for goodness. So prime matter is not good because of what it is, because it isn't anything determinate, but because of what it's for. It's the raw capacity to be something actual. And our final objection today has to do with numbers. The philosopher, he says, which is Aristotle in Metaphysics 3, says that in mathematics no goodness exists. Then he says that mathematical entities are beings, otherwise we couldn't have a science of them. So not every being is good. His reply, mathematical entities do not exist as real entities. They are logical entities, insofar as they are abstracted from matter and motion. If they were realities, then they would have some kind of goodness. But they only have logical existence. So they can't have that aspect of an end, which he says is itself the aspect of moving another. In other words, Aquinas is going to go with moderate realism when it comes to mathematical entities. This is a question that philosophers still ask today. What is the existence of numbers? What is the existence of mathematical objects? Are they real things that are out there? Are they things that we just made up in our heads? If they are, then how is it that they map onto the world so easily? Aquinas is going to say they exist, but they exist only from an abstraction from material things into our minds. If you consider like a triangle, triangles don't exist as triangles just floating around in the real world. Triangles are always like a wooden triangle or a yellow triangle or something like that. It's only when we abstract from the material thing that we get a triangle without any kind of matter, without any kind of color in our minds. And that's why goodness doesn't apply to a triangle, because it doesn't have this reality out here that would draw us to it, that would be some kind of an end. Aquinas goes on to address a further objection, but isn't it strange to say that logical entities don't have any kind of goodness? And he responds, remember from the last article, that the idea of being is prior to the idea of goodness. Mathematical objects have being in a logical sense, but since they don't have real being, they don't have real goodness. And so every being, insofar as it be's, is good. But there's still a question Aquinas hasn't answered yet. What exactly is the relationship between goodness and finality? We've said that goodness has the character of desirability, and that desirability has the character of an end. But does that mean that goodness just is final causality? Is to be good simply to be an end, a goal, a that toward which? That's Article 4, whether goodness has the aspect of a final cause. The answer is going to connect everything that we've seen so far to Aristotle's idea of four causes, which I've done a video on that you can check out. And don't forget to stay tuned for that video on Article 4, and then like, subscribe, and comment. And I will see you in that video. Adios.